truth that the things in me, and all I see is what I'm wanting to be. I was the center of my universe until I found that I was never the one. I found that I was never the one. Sometimes the blind lead the blind. The truth is not hard to find. See the signs, draw the line, yet still you'll be undermined. I was one of a kind until the sun left me blind, and now I finally find that I was never the one. Never the one. Never the one. Never the one. They keep me awake, the dreams are too much to take. What's at stake, what is fake, trying so hard not to break. Do you feel the world shake from the decisions we make? The smoke had faded away, and I was never the one. Never the one. Never the one. Never the one. I find that I was never the one.
There we go. That's the button I missed. Hello there. Hope we're all doing well. Today, I will be continuing with The Wheel of Time by New Spring by Robert Jordan. This is the prequel novel. Last time, we met Alan Mandragoran, and he was about to fight some Aiel, and they called out a weird name that in the old tongue means nation of one, and ran away around him rather than fighting him, and like his 300 friends or whatever. There was like 2,000 of them that just saw him and ran away. It's like, nope, getting the fuck out of here. And then in chapter 2, we met Suan and Moraine, and they heard the foretelling that the dragon had just been born. And g'day, Wolfie, how you doing, mate? And now we're on to chapter 3. And let me just start by having a quick drink. Someone suggested to me that I could put some lo-fi on while I'm doing this, but I don't know. I just kind of like the idea of just me and a microphone and the book. The wide corridor outside the Amelins' apartments was as cold as her sitting room had been, and full of draughts. Some were strong enough to ripple one or another of the long, heavy tapestries on the white marble walls. Atop the gilded stand lamps between the bright wall hangings, the flames flickered, nearly blown out. The novices would be at their breakfast at this hour, and likely most of the other accepted too. For the moment, the hallways were empty save for Suan and Moraine. They walked along the blue runner, half the width of the corridor, taking advantage of the small protection the carpet gave from the chill of the floor tiles, a repeating pattern in the colours of all 7 arches. Moraine was too stunned to speak. The faint sound of the trumpets still sounding barely registered on her. They turned the corner into a hallway where the floor tiles were white, the runner green. To their right, another wide tapestry hung corridor lined with stand lamps spiraled gently upwards toward the Arger's quarters. The visible portion floored in blue and yellow, with a runner patterned in grey and brown. Yes. Miss Butterscotch is bouncing around doing something. Grey and brown and red. Inside each Arger's quarters, their Arger's own colour predominated, and some others might be missing altogether, but in the communal areas of the tower, the colours of all the Argers were used in equal proportion. Irrelevant thoughts drifted through her head. Why equal, when some Argers were larger than others? Had they once been the same size? How could that have been achieved? A newly raised Aes Sedai chose her Arger freely, yet each Arger had quarters of the same size. Irrelevant thoughts were better than... "Do you want breakfast?" Suan said. Moraine gave a small start of surprise. "Breakfast? I could not swallow a bite, Suan." The other woman shrugged. "I have no appetite myself. I just thought I'd keep you company if you wanted something." "I'm going back to my room to try to get a little sleep, if I can settle myself. I have a novice class in 2 hours. And likely more classes to teach today. If the sisters did not start returning soon, novices could not miss classes for little things like battles or... She did not want to think about the or. She would miss lessons too. If the Aes Sedai failed to return, accepted studied on their own for the most part, but she had a private class scheduled with Maylin Sedai and another with Larel Sedai. All these bloody names. God damn. "Sleep would be wasting time we don't have," Suan said firmly. "We'll practice for the testing. We might have almost a month, but it could be tomorrow just as easily. We cannot be sure we will be tested anytime soon. Marine just said she thought we were close." Suan snorted loudly. While she was still a novice, the sisters had cleaned up her language, which had been strongly redolent of the docks and often rough with it. But they still had not managed to smooth away all the edges of her, which was just as well. Rough edges were part of Suan. When Moraine says someone is close, she tests them within the month. And you know it, Moraine. We'll practice. Moraine sighed. She did not really believe that she could sleep, not now, but she doubted she could concentrate very well either. Practice took concentration. "Oh, all right, Suan." The second surprise, after their friendship, had been the realization that between them, the fisherman's daughter led and the noblewoman followed. Of course, rank in the outside world carried no rights inside the tower. There had been 2 daughters of beggars who rose to be Amelin seat, as well as daughters of merchants and farmers and craftsfolk, including 3 daughters of cobblers, but only 1 daughter of a ruler. Besides, Moraine had been taught to judge people's capabilities long before she left home. In the Sun Palace especially, you began learning that as soon as you were old enough to walk. Suan had been born to lead. It felt surprisingly natural to follow where Suan led. I wager you will be in the hall of the tower by the time you have worn the shawl 100 years, and Amelin before 50 more, she said. Not for the first time. It brought the same reaction it always did. Hey, Landon. Don't ill-wish me, Suan said with a scowl. I intend to see the world. Maybe parts of it no other sister has seen. I used to watch the ships sail in Tyr full of silk and ivory from Shara, and I'd wonder if any of the crew had the nerve to sneak outside of the trade ports. I would have. Her face matched Tamara's for determination. Once, my father took his boat all the way downriver to the Sea of Storms, and I could hardly pull on the nets for staring south, wondering what lay beyond the horizon. I'll see it one day, and the Aranthov Ocean. Who knows what lies west of the Arath Ocean? Strange lands with strange customs, maybe cities as great as Tar Valon, and mountains higher than the spine of the world. Just think of it, Moraine, just think. Moraine suppressed a smile. Suan was so fierce about her intended adventures. Though she would never call them that, adventures were what took place in stories and books, not in life, as Suan would point out to anybody who used the word. Without a doubt, though, once she had the shawl, she would be off like an arrow leaving the bow, and then they might see one another once or twice in 10 years, if not longer. That brought a pang of sadness, but she did not doubt that her own predictions would come true. Predictions. I read that wrong. My apologies. She did not doubt that her own predictions would come true as well. It did not take a foretelling. No, that was thinking in the wrong direction. As they turned another corner and walked past the narrow marble staircase leading down, Suan's scowl faded, and she began studying Moraine in sidelong glances. The floor tiles were a vivid green, the runner a deep yellow, and the white walls were plain and bare. The stand lamps were not gilded in this part of the tower, which was used more by servants than sisters. You're trying to change the subject, aren't you? Suan said abruptly. Which subject? Moraine asked, half laughing. Practice or breakfast? You know what subject, Moraine. What do you think about it? The bubble of laughter vanished. There was no need to ask what it was. Exactly the thing that she did not want to think about. He is born again. She could hear Gitara's voice in her head. The dragon takes his first breath. Her shiver had nothing to do with the cold this time. For more than 3,000 years the world had waited on the prophecies of the dragon to be fulfilled, fearing them, yet knowing they told of the world's only hope. And now a boy child was about to be born very soon, perhaps by the way Gitara had spoken, to bring those prophecies to a conclusion. He would be born on the slopes of Dragonmount, reborn where it was said the man he had once been had died. 3,000 years ago and more, the Dark One had almost broken free into the world of humankind and brought on the war of the Shadow, which had ended only with the breaking of the world. Everything had been destroyed. The very face of the earth changed. Humanity reduced to ragged refugees. Centuries passed before the simple struggle for survival gave way to building cities and nations once more. That infant's birth meant the Dark One would break free again, for the child would be born to face the Dark One in Tarman Gaidon, the last battle. On him rested the fate of the world. The prophecies said he was the only chance. They did not say he would win. Maybe worse than the thought of his defeat, though, was the fact that he would channel Saidin, the male half of the One Power. Moraine did not shiver at that. She shuddered. Saidin bore the Dark One's taint. Men still tried to channel from time to time. Some actually managed to teach themselves and survived learning without a teacher. No easy feat. Among women, only 1 in 4 survived trying to learn on their own. Some of those men caused wars, usually false dragons. men who claimed to be the Dragon Reborn, while others attempted to hide in ordinary lives. But unless they were caught and brought to Tarvalon to be gentled, to be cut off from the power forever. Every one of them went mad. It could take years or just months, yet it was inevitable. Madmen who could tap into the one power that turned the wheel of time and drove the universe. The histories were full of the horrors of men like that men like that had done. And the prophecy said that the Dragon Reborn would bring a new breaking of the world. Would his victory be any better than a victory by the Dark One? Yes. Yes, it must be. Even the breaking had left people alive to rebuild, eventually. The Dark One would leave only a charnel house. And in any case, prophecies did not turn aside for the wishes of accepted, not for the prayers of nations. What I think is that the Amelin told us not to think about it, she said. Suan shook her head. She told us not to tell anyone else, since we already know it must be all right for us to talk about it between ourselves. She cut off as a stout serving woman with the white flame of Tarvalon on her breast appeared around the corner just ahead of them. As the round woman walked past, she peered down her long nose at them suspiciously. Perhaps they looked guilty. Apologies, I keep muting the stream whenever I need to cough or whatever, so that I don't cough in your precious ears. I'd rather you guys still be able to hear after spending some time with me. Male servants often turned a blind eye to what accepted, and even novices got up to. Perhaps they wanted no more involvement with Aes Sedai than their jobs entailed. Female servants, on the other hand, kept as close a watch as the sisters themselves. Yes, cough SMR. As long as we're careful, Suan breathed. Once the liveried woman was beyond earshot. However certain she was that talking between themselves was all right, she seemed content to say no more until they reached the accepted quarters, in the tower's western wing. Going up. There, stone-railed galleries in a hollow well surrounded a small garden 3 levels below. The garden was only a handful of evergreen bushes poking through the snow at this time of year. An accepted who put her feet too far wrong might find herself clearing away that snow with a shovel. The sisters were great believers that physical labour built character, but no one had gotten into that much trouble lately. Resting her hands on the railing, Moraine peered up at the bright winter morning sky, past the 6 silent rows of galleries above. Her breath made a white mist in front of her face. The trumpets were more audible here than in the hallways, the stink of smoke stronger in the air. There were rooms for over 100 accepted in this well. And the same in the second well too. Perhaps the numbers would not have come to mind now except for Guitara's foretelling. Yet she had thought about them before.
Sentry mode activated.
Hello, Arya. They were etched in her brain as if with acid. Space for above 200 accepted, but the second well had been shut up since the time out of memory. for any living Aes Sedai, and barely more than 60 of these rooms were occupied. The novices' quarters also had 2 wells, with rooms for almost 400 girls, but one of those was long closed too, and the other held under 100. She had read that that once novices and accepted had both been housed 2 to a room. Once, half the girls who were entered in the novice book had been tested for the ring. Fewer than 20 out of the current novices would be allowed to. The tower had been built to house 3,000 sisters, but only 423 were in residence at the moment, with perhaps twice as many more scattered across the nations. Numbers that still burned like acid. No Aes Sedai would say it aloud, and she would never dare say it where a sister might hear, but the White Tower was failing. The tower was failing, and the last battle was coming. Ask me nicely. You worry too much, Suan said gently. My father used to say, change what you can if it needs changing, but learn to live with what you can't change. You'll only get sick to your stomach otherwise. That was me, not my father. With another snort, she gave an overdone shiver and wrapped her arms around herself. Can we get inside now? I'm freezing. My room is closest. Come on. Moraine nodded. The tower taught its students to live with what they could not change too. But some things were important enough to try, even if you were sure to fail. That had been one of her lessons as a child. Accepted rooms were identical, except in detail, slightly wider at the back than at the door, with plain wall panels of dark wood. None of the furnishings were fine, or indeed anything a sister would have tolerated. There was a small, square Tarrabona rug, woven in faded blue and green stripes on Suan's floor, and the mirrored washstand in the corner held a chipped white pitcher sitting in the wash basin. Accepted were required to make do unless something actually broke, and if it broke, they had best give a good explanation why. The small table with 3 leather-bound books stacked on it, and 2 ladder-back chairs could have come from a penniless farmer's house, but Suan slept in bed with its tumbled blankets was wide, like something from a moderately prosperous farmhouse. A small wardrobe completed the furnishings. None was carved or ornamented in any way. When Moraine had moved from the small, stark room of a novice, she had felt as if she were moving into a palace, though the chamber was half the size of any room in her apartments in the Sun Palace. Best of all, at the moment, was the fireplace of dressed grey stone. Today, any room without a fireplace any room with a fireplace would seem like a palace if she could stand near it. Stretchy time. Suan hastily moved 3 pieces of split wood to the fire irons on the hearth. The wood box was almost empty. Serving men brought Aes Sedai their firewood, but Accepted had to carry theirs upstairs themselves. Then grunted when she discovered that her efforts at banking the coals of last night's fire had failed, no doubt in a hurry to reach the Amelin's chambers. She had not covered them with ashes well enough to stop them from burning out. A frown creased her forehead for a moment. Then Moraine felt that small tingle again, as the light of Saidar briefly surrounded the other woman. Any woman who could feel another wielding the power, if she was close enough. But the tingle was unusual. Women who spent a lot of time together in their training sometimes felt it, but the sensation was supposed to fade away over time. Hers and Suan's never had. Sometimes Moraine thought it was a sign of how close their friendship was. When the glow winked out, the short lengths of log were burning merrily. Moraine said nothing, but Suan gave her a look as if she had delivered a speech. I was too cold to wait, Moraine, she said defensively. Besides, you must remember a Karen's lecture 2 weeks ago. You must know the rules to the letter, she quoted, and live with them before you can know which rules you may break and when. That says right out that sometimes you can break the rules. A Karen, a slender brown with quick eyes to catch who was not following her, had been lecturing about Aes Sedai, not accepted, but Moraine held her tongue. Siwan had not needed the lecture to think about breaking rules. Oh, she never broke the major strictures. She never tried to run away or was disrespectful to a sister or anything of that sort. And she would never think of stealing. But she had a liking for pranks. From the start. Well, Moraine did too. Most accepted did. At least now and then, and some novices as well. Playing jokes was a way to relieve the strain of constant study with few free days. Accepted had no chores beyond those necessary to keep themselves and their rooms tidy, unless they got into trouble at least. But they were expected to work hard on their studies, harder than novices dreamed of. Some relief was needed, or you would crack like an egg dropped on stone. Nothing she and Siwan had done was malicious, of course. Washing her hated accepted shifts with itch-oak did not count. G'day, Dark. Elida had... So apparently police are looking for a 52-year-old male, and that's important enough to bother my stream. If you've seen a 52-year-old bloke just wandering around looking crazy, contact the police. All right. No, I'm not 50. I'm not even 40 at the moment. I like being able to say that. Elida had made their first year as novices a misery, setting the standards for them that no one could have met, yet insisting they be met. The second year, after she gained the shawl, had been the worst until she left the tower. Most of their pranks had been much more benign, even though the most innocent could bring swift punishment, especially if the target was an Aes Sedai. Their major triumph had been filling the largest fountain in the water garden with a fat green trout one night the previous summer. Major in part because of the difficulty, and in part because they had escaped discovery. A few sisters had directed suspicious looks at them, but luckily no one could prove they had done it. Luckily, asking them whether they had was simply not done with accepted. Putting trout in the fountain might not have brought a visit to the mistress of novices' study, but leaving the tower grounds without permission in order to buy them, and worse, at night, surely would have. Moraine hoped Siwan was not building up a prank with this talk of breaking rules. She herself was too tired. They were bound to be caught. "Will you go first, or shall I?" she asked. Maybe the practice would take Siwan's mind off getting into trouble. "You need the practice more. We'll concentrate on you this morning, and this afternoon, and tonight." Moraine grimaced, but it was true. The test for the shawl consisted of creating 100 different weaves perfectly and in a precise order, while under great stress. And it was necessary to display complete calm the entire time. Exactly what that stress would be, they did not know, except that the attempts would be made to distract them. and to break the composure. For practice, they provided the distractions for each other, and Suan was very good at throwing her off at the worst moment or provoking a temper. Too much temper and you could not hold on to Saidar at all. Even after her 6 years of work at it, her channeling required at least a degree of calm. Suan could seldom be unsettled, and her temper was held with an iron grip. Embracing the true source, Moraine let Saidar fill her. Not as much of it as she could hold, but enough for practicing. Channeling was tiring work, and the more of the power you channeled, the worse. Even that tiny amount spread through her, filling her with joy and life, with exultation. The wonder of it was near to torment. When she had first embraced Saidar, she had not known whether to weep or to laugh. She immediately felt the urge to draw more and force the desire down. All of her senses were clearer, sharper, with the power inside of her. She thought she could almost hear Suan's heart beating. She could feel the currents of air move against her face and hands, and the colours banding on her friend's dress was more vivid. The white of the wool whiter. She could make out the tiny cracks in the wall panels, and she could not have seen without putting her nose against the wall, lacking the power that suffused her totally. It was exhilarating. She felt more alive. Part of her wished she could hold Saidar every waking moment. But that was strictly prohibited. The desire could lead to drawing more and more, until eventually you drew more than you could handle, and that either killed you or else burned out your ability to channel out of you entirely. Losing this bliss would be much worse than death. Suan took one of the chairs, and the glow enveloped her. Moraine could not see the light around herself, of course, weaving a ward against eavesdropping around the inside of her room, flat against the walls, floors, and ceiling. Suan tied it off so she did not have to maintain it. Holding 2 weaves at once was more than twice as taxing as 1. 3 more than twice as wearing as 2. Beyond that, difficult no longer sufficed as a description, although it could be done. She motioned for Moraine to turn her back. With a frown for the ward, Moraine complied. It would be easy to avoid distraction if she could see the weave Suan was preparing for her. But why ward against eavesdropping? Someone with an ear pressed to the door would hear nothing if she screamed at the top of her lungs. Surely Suan would not do anything to make her scream. No, it had to be the first part of trying to unsettle her, by making her even wonder over it. She felt Suan handling flows, earth and air, then fire and water and spirit, then earth and spirit, always changing, without looking. There was no way to tell what the other woman was creating, a weave, or just trying another diversion. Taking a deep breath, she concentrated on utter calm. Most of the weaves in the test were extremely complex and had been designed solely for the test. Oddly, none required any gestures, which a good many weaves did. The motion was not really part of the weave, except that if you did not make it, the weave did not work. Supposedly, the gestures set certain pathways in your mind. The lack of gestures made it seem possible that you might lack the use of your hands during at least part of the test. And that sounded ominous. Another oddity was that none of the incredibly intricate weaves actually did anything. And even done incorrectly, they would not produce anything dangerous. Not too dangerous, anyway. There was a very real possibility with a number of weaves. Some of the simplest could prove disastrous if done just a little off. Women had died in the testing, but obviously not from bungling a weave. Still, a mistake with the first could yield a deafening thunderclap. She channeled very thin flows of air, weaving them just so. This was a very simple weave, but you could not force Saidar, no matter how small the threads. The power was like a vast river flowing inexorably onward. Try to force it, and you would be swept away like a twig on the river Erinin. You had to use its overwhelming strength to guide it as you wanted. In any case, size was not specified, and small was less work. And the noise would be smaller if Suan managed to. Moraine, do you think the Reds will be able to make themselves leave him alone? Moraine gave a jerk even before the weave she was making produced a boom like a kettle drum. Any sister was expected to deal with a man who could channel if she encountered one, but Reds concentrated on hunting them down. Suan meant the boy child. That explained the ward, and maybe the talk of breaking rules. Maybe Suan was not so sure as she pretended that Tamra would not care if they discussed the child between themselves. Moraine glared over her shoulder. Don't stop, Suan said calmly. She was still channeling, but not doing anything beyond handling the flows. You really do need practice if you fumbled that one. Well, do you, about the Reds? This time the weave produced a silver-blue disc the size of a small coin that dropped into Moraine's outstretched hand. The shape was not specified either, another oddity, but discs and balls were easier. Woven of air yet hard as steel, it felt slightly cold. She released the weave and the coin vanished, leaving only a residue of the power that would soon fade away as well. The next weave was one of the complex and useless sort, requiring all of the 5 powers, but Moraine answered as she wove it. She could talk and channel at the same time, after all. Air and fire so, and earth thus, spirit then air once more. She wove without stopping. For some reason, you could not hold these weaves only partly done for very long till they collapsed into something else entirely. Spirit again, then fire and earth together. They will have 20 years to learn how, or nearly so at worst. At best, they will have longer. Girls sometimes, if rarely, began channeling as young as 12 or 13, if they were born with the spark. But even with the spark, boys never did before 18 or 19, unless they tried to learn how. And in some men, the spark did not come out until they were as old as 30. Air again, then spirit and water, all placed precisely. Besides, he will be the dragon reborn. Even the Reds will have to see that he cannot be gentled until after he fights the last battle. A grim fate, to save the world if he could, and then for reward be cut off from this wonder. Prophecy was not known for mercy any more than for yielding to prayers. Earth again, then fire, then more air. The thing was beginning to look like the most hopeless knot in the world. Will that be enough? I've heard some of the Reds don't try all that hard to take those poor men alive. She had heard that too, but it was only a rumour, and a violation of Tower law. A sister could be birched for it and likely exiled to a secluded farm to think on her crime for a time. It should be counted as murder, but given what those men would do unrestrained, she could almost see why it was not. More spirit laid down, and earth threaded through. Invisible fingers seemed to run up her sides to her armpits. She was ticklish, as Suan knew well. But the other woman would need to do better than that. She barely flinched. As someone told me not long ago, learn to live with what you cannot change, she said wryly. The wheel of time weaves as the wheel wills, and arches do what they do, more air and fire, like so, followed by water, earth, and spirit. Then all 5 at once. Light, what a ghastly tangle. And not done yet. What I think, Suan began, and the door banged open, letting in a surge of freezing air that swept away all the warmth of the fire. With Sidar filling her awareness heightened. Moraine felt suddenly covered with a coat of ice from head to toe. The door also let in Myrel Berengari, an accepted from Altara who had earned the ring in the same year as they, olive-skinned and beautiful, and almost as tall as Suan. Myrel was gregarious and also mercurial. with a boisterous sense of humour and a temper even worse than Moraine's when she let it go. The two of them had begun with heated words as novices that got them both switched, and had somehow found themselves friends. Well, not as close as Suan and she, but still friends. The only reason she did not snap at the other accepted for walking in without knocking, not that they would have heard it if she had pounded, not with the ward set, not that that mattered. It was the principle of the thing. How long before the last battle, do you think? Myrelle asked, shutting the door. She took in a half-completed weave in front of Moraine and the water around the room, and a grin appeared on her list. Practicing for the test, I see. Have you been making her squeal, Suan? I can help if you like. I know a sure way to make her squeal like a piglet caught in a net. Moraine hurriedly let the weave dissipate before it could collapse and exchanged confused looks with Suan. How could Myrelle know? I did not squeal like in the way you said, she said primly, playing for time. Most accepted pranks were aimed at other accepted, and Myrelle's numbers almost matched hers and Suan's. That particular one had involved ice in the depths of summer heat, when even shade felt like an oven, but she had not sounded anything like a piglet. What do you mean, Myrelle? Suan asked cautiously. Why, the Aiel, of course. What else could I mean? Moraine exchanged another look with Suan, of chagrin this time. A number of sisters claimed that various passages in the prophecies of the dragon referred to the Aiel. Of course, just as many said they did not. At the beginning of the war, there had been rather animated discussions about the matter. They would have been called shouting arguments if the women involved had not been Aes Sedai. But with what they knew now, all of that had slipped right out of Moraine's head, and plainly out of Suan's too. Keeping their knowledge hidden was going to take constant vigilance. The pair of you have a secret, don't you? Myrelle said. I don't know anybody for having secrets like you two. Well, don't think I'll ask, because I won't. By her expression, she was dying to ask. It isn't ours to tell, Suan replied, and Moraine's eyebrows climbed before she could control her face. What was Suan up to? Was she trying to play Deus Demar? Moraine had tried to teach her how the game of houses worked. In Kairen, even servants and farmers knew how to maneuver for advantage and deflect others from their own plans and secrets. In Kairen, nobles and commoners alike lived by Deus Demar, more so than anywhere else in the world, and the game was played everywhere, even in lands where everyone denied it. For all Moraine's efforts, though, Suan had never shown much facility. She was just too straightforward. But you can help me with Moraine, the woman went on, even more surprisingly. Their practice was always just the two of them. She knows my tricks too well by now. Laughing, Myrelle rubbed her hands together gleefully and took the second chair, the light of the power springing up around her. Grimly, Moraine turned her back again and took up the second weave. But Suan said, From the beginning, Moraine, you know better. You have to have the order fixed in your head so firmly that nothing can make you fumble it. With a small sigh, Moraine produced a silver blue coin of air once more, then moved on. Suan was right in a way about her knowing Suan's tricks. Suan liked to use tickles at the worst possible moment, sudden pokes in unpleasant places, embarrassing caresses, and startling noises right behind her ear. That and saying the most shocking things she could think of. And she had a vivid imagination even after the sisters worked with her language. Knowing the other woman's tricks did not make it any easier to hold on to complete composure, though. She had to start over twice because of Suan. Myrelle was worse. She liked ice. Ice was easy to make. Why do I feel like... There we go, I'm slightly less fuzzy. Apologies, everyone. Ice was easy to make, a matter of using water and fire to draw it out of the air. But Moraine would like to see how Myrelle managed to make its materialize inside her dress, in the worst places. Myrelle also channeled flows to make it sly pinches and sharp flicks, as if Moraine had been snapped with a switch, and sometimes a solid blow across a bottom that felt like the fall of a strap. They were real pinches and real blows. The bruises they left were real too. Once, Myrelle lifted her foot off the ground with ropes of air. She was certain it was her. Suan had never done anything like this, and slowly rotated her head down and feet pointed towards the ceiling so her skirts fell over her head. Heart pounding and close to frantic, she pushed her skirts up in front of her face with her hands. It was not modesty. She had to keep weaving. You could hold a weave without seeing it, but you could not weave. And if this particular bundle of the 5 powers collapsed, it would give her a painful shock, as though she had scuffed her feet across carpet, then touched a piece of iron, only 3 times as bad, and felt all over. She managed to complete that one successfully, but all in all, Myrelle broke her concentration 4 times. Back to the sitting. She felt a growing irritation over that, but with herself, not Myrelle. One thing every accepted agreed on was that whatever the sisters did to you in the test would be worse than anything your friends could think of. And if they were your friends, they would do the worst they could think of, short of actual harm, to help you prepare. Light, if Myrelle and Suan could make her fail 6 times in so short a time, what hope did she have in the actual test? But she kept on with unbending determination. She would pass, and on her first try she would. She was making that second weave yet again when the door opened once more, and she let the flows vanish, reluctantly let go of Saidar altogether. There was always a reluctance to let go. Life seemed to drain away along with the power. The world became drab, and she would not have had time to finish in any case before her novice class. Accepted were not allowed clocks, but which were too expensive for most to afford in any event. And the gongs that sounded the hour were not always audible inside the tower. So it was best if you developed a keen sense of time. Accepted were no more permitted to be late than novices were. The woman who stood holding the door open was not a friend, taller than Suan. Tana Fear was from the north of Altara, close to Andor, but a pale yellow hair was not her only difference from Myrelle. Accepted were not allowed to be arrogant, yet one look into those cold blue eyes told you that she was. She possessed no sense of humour either, and as far as anyone knew, she had never played a joke on anyone. Tana had gained the ring a year before Suan and Moraine, after 9 years as a novice, and she had had few friends as a novice, and few now. She did not seem to notice the lack. A very different woman from Myrelle. I should have expected to find you two together, she said coolly. There never seemed to be any heat in her. I can't understand why you don't just move into the same room. Are you joining Suan's coterie now, Myrelle? All said matter-of-factly, yet Myrelle's eyes began to flash. The glow had vanished from Suan, but Myrelle still held the power. Moraine hoped she was not rash enough to use it. Go away, Tana, Suan said with a quick dismissive gesture. We're busy, and close the door. Tana did not move. I have to hurry and make my novice class, Moraine said to Suan. Tana, she ignored. They are just learning how to make a ball of fire, and if I'm not there, one of them is sure to try it anyway. Novices were forbidden to channel or even embrace the source without a sister or one of the accepted looking over their shoulders, but they did anyway, given half a chance. New girls never really believed the dangers involved, while the older ones were always sure they knew how to avoid those dangers. The novices have been given a free day, Tana said, so no classes today. Being dismissed and ignored did not disconcert her a little bit. Nothing did. No doubt Tana would pass for the shawl on her first try with ease. The accepted are summoned to the Oval Lecture Hall. The Amelin is going to address us. One other thing you should know. Guitarra Morosa died just a few hours ago. The lights surrounding Myrelle winked out. So that's the secret you were keeping, she explained. Her eyes flashed hotter than they had for Tana. I told you it wasn't ours to share, Suan replied, an Aes Sedai answer if ever there was one. It was enough to make Myrelle nod in agreement, however, reluctantly. And that nod was reluctant. Her eyes did not lose their heat. Moraine expected that she and Suan might soon have surprising encounters with ice. Apologies, peeps. This ain't going to go away till I do some of this. Still holding the doors open. Was the woman immune to the cold, like her sister? Tana studied Moraine, then Suan. That's right, you two would have to be in attendance. What happened? Would have been in attendance. What happened? All the rest of us have heard is that she had died. I was handing her a cup of tea when she gasped and fell dead in my arms, Moraine replied.
You can't the wheel's supreme executive power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you.
Thank you, sir. Now, where was I? I guess that makes you the watery tart, doesn't it, Serb? I was handing her a cup of tea and then she gasped and fell dead in my arms, Moraine replied. And that was an even better Aes Sedai answer than Suan's, every word true while avoiding the whole truth. To her surprise, an expression of sadness crossed Tana's face. It was fleeting, but it had been there. Tana never showed emotion. She was carved from stone. Guitarra Sedai was a great woman, she murmured. She will be badly missed. Why is the Amelin going to speak to us? Moraine asked. Plainly, Guitarra's death had already been announced, and by custom her funeral would be tomorrow, so there was no need to announce that. Surely Tamara did not mean to tell the accepted about the foretelling. It's all there in the title, my friend, reading the New Spring, which is the prequel book. I don't know, Tana replied. All coolness once more. But I shouldn't have stood here talking. Everyone else was told to leave breakfast immediately, and if we run, we can just make it before the Amelin arrives. Pull up a seat, my friend. You're welcome to talk amongst yourselves. Accepted were required to maintain a certain amount of dignity, preparation for the day they reached the shoal. They certainly were never supposed to run unless ordered to, but run they did. Tana as hard as the rest of them, hiking her skirts to the knees and ignoring the startled looks of liveried servants in the corridors. Aes Sedai did not keep the Amelin seat waiting. Accepted never even thought of it. The oval lecture hall with its wide scrollwork crown running beneath a gently domed ceiling, painted with sky and white clouds, was seldom used. Moraine and the others were the last of the accepted to arrive, yet the rows of polished wooden benches were less than a quarter filled. The babble of voices, accepted, offering suggestions of why the Amelin would address them, seemed to emphasize how few they were compared to what the chamber had been built to hold. Moraine put dwindling numbers firmly out of her head. Maybe if the sisters... No, she would not brood. Thankfully, the dais at the front of the hall was still empty. She and Suan found places at the back of the crowd, and Tana sat beside them, but clearly not with them. The woman wore aloofness like a cloak. Myrelle, still in a huff over not being told about Gitara, stalked around to the other end of the row. Half the women in the room seemed to be talking, all on top of each other. It was nearly impossible to make out what anyone in particular was saying, and the little Moraine did hear was utter nonsense. All of them to be tested for the shawl immediately? Aladrin must have brain fever to be spouting such drivel. Well, she was excitable. Brendas even worse. Normally sensible, she was claiming that they were to be sent home because Gitara had foretold the end of the White Tower, or maybe of the world before she died. Likely by noon there would be a dozen tales about Gitara having a foretelling, if there were not more than that already. Rumours grew in the accepted quarters like roses in a hothouse. But Moraine still did not like hearing one. To keep their secret, she was going to have to spin the truth like a top, at least for the next few days. She hoped she was up to it. Does anybody know anything? Suan asked the accepted next to her, a slim, very dark woman with straight black hair hanging to her waist and a scattering of black tattoos on her hands. Or is it all just the wind? Zemail regarded her soberly for a moment before saying, "Wind, I think." Zemail always took her time. For that matter, she was always sober and thoughtful. Very likely she would choose brown when she was raised, or perhaps white. She was a rarity in the tower, one of the sea folk, the Athenmere. There were only 4 sea folk Aes Sedai, all browns, and 2 of them were almost as old as Gitara had been. Athenmere girls never came to the tower unless they manifested the spark or managed to begin learning on their own. In either case, a delegation of sea folk delivered the girl, then left as soon as they could. The Athenmere disliked being very long away from salt water, and the nearest sea to Tar Valon lay 400 leagues to the south. Zemail, though, seemed to want to forget her origins. At least, she would never talk about the sea folk unless pressed by an Aes Sedai, and she was diligent, intently focused on earning the shawl from her first day, so Moraine had heard, though she was not quick to learn. Not slower than most, just not quick. She had been accepted for 8 years now, and 10 years a novice before that, and Moraine had seen her fumble a weave time after time before suddenly setting it so perfectly that you wondered why she had failed before. But then everyone progressed at their own pace, and the tower never pushed harder than you could go. A tall accepted on the row in front of them. Aisling Noon twisted around. She was almost bouncing on the bench with excitement. It's the foretelling, I say. Gitara had a foretelling before she died, and the Amelin is going to tell us what it is. You two had the duty this morning, didn't you? You were with her when she died. What did she say? Suan stiffened, and Moraine opened her mouth to lie, but Tana saved her. Moraine told me Gitara didn't have a foretelling. Iceling. We'll find out what the Amelin wants to tell us when she arrives. Her voice was cool, as always, but not cutting. Iceling blushed furiously anyway. She was another rarity for the tower. One of the Tuatha'an, the Tinkers. The Tuatha'an lived in garishly painted wagons, travelling from village to village, and, like the sea folk, they wanted no self-taught wilders around them. If a band discovered the spark coming out of one of their girls, they turned their train of wagons and headed for Tar Valon as fast as their horses could move. Varen, a stout brown who was even shorter than Moraine, said that Tinker girls never tried to find their way to channeling on their own, that they did not want to channel or become Aes Sedai. It must be so, since Varen had said it. Yet Iceling applied herself with just as much determination as Zemail, and with more success. She had earned the ring in 5 years, in the same year as Moraine and Suan. And Moraine thought she might test for the shawl in another year, perhaps less. One of the doors at the back of the dais opened, and Tamara glided out, still in the blue dress she had worn the night before, the Amelin stole draped around her back. Moraine was one of the first to see her, the first to rise, but in moments everyone was on her feet and silent. It seemed strange to see the Amelin by herself. Always when Tana was seen in the corridors, she was accompanied by at least a few Aes Sedai, whether ordinary sisters presenting petitions or sitters in the hall of the tower, discussing some matter that was before the hall. She looked weary to Moraine. Oh, her back was straight, and her expression said she could walk through a wall if she took it in mind. But something about her eyes spoke of tiredness that had little to do with missing sleep. In thanksgiving for the continued safety of Tar Valon, she said, her voice carrying easily to everyone, I have decided that the tower will give a bounty of 100 crowns in gold to every woman in the city who bore a child between the day the first soldiers arrived and the day the threat is ended. It is being announced on the streets even as I speak. Everyone knew better than to make a sound while the Amelin was speaking, yet that brought a few murmurs, including one from Suan. Actually, hers was more of a grunt. She had never seen 10 gold crowns in one place, much less 100. 100 would buy a very large farm, or who knew how many fishing boats. Ignoring the break in proprieties, Tamara continued without a pause. As some of you may already know, an army is always accompanied by camp followers, sometimes more camp followers than there are soldiers. Many of these are craft folk an army needs. The armourers and fletchers, the blacksmith and farriers and wagon wrights, but among them are soldiers' wives and other women. Since the army provided the shield to Tar Valon, I have decided to extend the bounty to these women also. Moraine realised she was...
Mr. Nesbit of Harlow, Newtown. Mr. Nesbit, would you stand up, please? Mr. Nesbit has learned the first lesson of not being seen, not to stand up. However, he has chosen a very obvious piece of cover.
You need to find better cover, Hannah. Moraine realized she was biting at her lower lip and made herself stop. It was a habit she was trying to break. There was certainly no point to letting anyone know you know that you were thinking furiously. No, it's all good. I wouldn't have these alerts if I didn't want to be interrupted by them. At least now they knew what Tamara was after. She must believe the boy child really would be born soon, and why under the light tell accepted? That threat might continue for some time, Tamara said, though I have reports this morning that the Aiel may be retreating. Yet the situation appears safe enough to begin collecting names, at least in the camps closest to the city. To be fair to these women, we must begin as soon as possible, before any of them leave. Some will, if the Aiel really are going. Many of the soldiers will follow the Aiel, soon to be joined by their camp followers, and other soldiers will return to their homes. No sisters have returned to the tower yet, so I am sending all of you to begin taking names. Since, inevitably, some women will slip away before you find them, you will all also ask after those who gave birth and can't be found. Write down everything that might help locate them, who the father is, from what town or village, what country, everything. You will each be accompanied by 4 tower guards to make sure no one troubles you. Moraine almost choked trying to keep silent. Astonished gasps rose from the women less successful than she. It was rare enough to be for Accepted to be allowed to leave the city, but without a sister? That was unheard of. With a small, indulgent smile, Tamara paused to let order restore itself. She plainly knew she had startled them out of their wits. She also apparently heard something that Moraine did not catch, and silence fell again. The Amyrlin said, "If I hear that someone has used the power to defend herself, Alana, that someone will sit very tenderly after a visit to the Mistress of Novices." A few of the Accepted were still unsettled enough to giggle, and 1 or 2 laughed aloud. Alana was a shy woman at heart, but she worked hard at being fierce. She told anyone who would listen that she wanted to belong to the Green, the battle archer, and have a dozen warders. Only Greens bonded more than a single warder. None had that many warders, of course, but that was Alana, always exaggerating. Tamara slapped her palms together, quietening gigglers and laughers alike at a stroke. There were limits to her indulgence. You will all take great care and heed the soldiers escorting you. There were no smiles now. Her voice was firm. The Amyrlin seat brooked no nonsense from rulers. She certainly would not from Accepted. The Aiel are not the only danger outside Tar Valon's walls. Some may think you are Aes Sedai, and you may let them for as long as you aren't foolish enough to claim that you are. That deepened the stillness. Claiming to be Aes Sedai when you were not violated a tower law that was enforced strictly, even against women who were not initiates of the tower. But there are ruffians who will see only a youthful woman's face. Easy prey, they might think, if not for your escort. Better to remove the temptation and avoid the problem altogether. And don't forget there are children of the light in the army. A white cloak will know an Accepted's dress when he sees one. And if he can safely put an arrow through her back, it will please him as much as if she were Aes Sedai. It hardly seemed possible the room could grow any quieter, yet it did. Moraine thought she could have heard the people breathing, except that no one seemed to be breathing. When an Aes Sedai went out into the world and vanished, as sometimes happened, the first thought was always the white cloaks. The children called the Aes Sedai dark friends and claimed that touching the one power was blasphemy, punishable by death, a sentence they were all too willing to carry out. No one could understand why they had come to help defend Tar Valon, no one among the Accepted at least. The Amyrlin ran her eyes slowly among the rows. At last she gave a nod, satisfied that her warning had sunk in. Horses are being saddled for you at the West Stable. There will be food for midday in the saddlebags and everything else you will need. Now return to your rooms, put on stout shoes, and fetch your cloaks. It will be a long day for you, and cold. Go in the light." It was a dismissal, and they offered curtsies, almost as one. But as they began moving towards the door to the corridor, she added, as though it had just occurred to her, "Oh yes," the words jerked everyone to a halt. "When you record the woman's name, also put down the infant's name and sex, the day he or she was born, and exactly where. The tower's records must be complete in this matter. You may go." Just as though what she had left till last was not the most important thing. That was how Aes Sedai hid things in plain sight. Some said Aes Sedai had invented the game of houses. Moraine could not help exchanging excited glance with Siuan. Siuan absolutely hated anything that smacked of clerical work, but she wore a wide grin. They were going to help find the dragon reborn. Just his name, of course, and his mother's name. But it was as near to an adventure as an accepted could hope for. Let me just see something. My neck is a bit sore and I just want to see how many pages chapter 4 is. Only 20 pages. Cool. I will do one more chapter and that's it for tonight. So 2 chapters a night sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Chapter 4, Leaving the Tower. Moraine's room was a little different from Siuan's. Her small, square table with 4 books lying on it and the 2 cushionless straight-back chairs could have come from the same farmhouse that provided Siuan's. Her bed was narrower, her Iliana carpet round and flowered, and darned in several places, while on her washstand it was the basin that had taken a blow some time in the past. The mirror had a crack in one corner. Apart from that, they could have been the same room. She did not bother with starting a fire. She had banked her coals more carefully than Siuan, but there was no time to take as much... there was no time to so much as take the edge off the room's chill. Reaching into the back of a wardrobe slightly larger than Siuan's, but just as plain, she brought out a stout pair of shoes that made her grimace. Ugly things made of leather much thicker than her slippers. The laces could have done to mend a saddle, but the shoes would keep her feet dry in the snow, and the slippers would not. Adding a pair of woolen stockings, she sat on the edge of her unmade bed to pull them over those she was already wearing. For a moment, she considered donning a second shift as well. However cold it was inside the tower, it would be colder where she was going. But time was short, and besides, she did not want to take off her dress in that icy air. Surely recording names would be done in some sort of shelter, with a fire or brazier for warmth. Of course it would. Most people in the camps likely would take them for sisters, just as Tamara had suggested. Next out of the wardrobe came a narrow, worked leather belt, with a silver buckle and a plain scabbard holding a slim, silver-mounted dagger, its blade a little longer than her hand. She had not worn that since arriving at the tower, and it felt awkward, at first, hanging at her waist. Perhaps she was forbidden to use the power to defend herself, but the dagger would do nicely, if need be. Transferring her belt pouch from the white leather belt she had laid on the bed, she thought for a moment. It was all very well for Tamara to say that everything they needed would be waiting, but depending on someone else, even the Amelin seat to provide everything was unwise. She tucked her ivory comb and ivory-handled hairbrush into a leather scrip. No matter how urgent the need to gather names, she doubted that any accepted would let herself go untidy for so long would escape sharp words at best. Her good riding gloves, dark blue leather, with just a touch of embroidery on the back, followed, plus a small sewing kit in a carved blackwood box, a ball of stout twine, 2 pairs of spare stockings in case the one she was wearing got wet, several kerchiefs in various sizes, and a number of other items that might be useful, including a little knife that folded for trimming quill pens, in the event that what was put in that what they found themselves. I'm going to try that sentence again. Including a little knife that folded for trimming quill pens in the event that was what they found themselves using. Sisters would never be forced to put up with such an inconvenience, but they were not sisters. Hanging the script from one shoulder, she gathered her cloak with its banded hem and another band bordering the hood, and rushed out just in time to see Maidani and Brendis go scurrying through the doorway that led off the gallery, cloaks flaring behind them. Suan was waiting impatiently, a scrip on her shoulder too beneath her cloak, and her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. She was not alone in being caught up in the moment. On the other side of the gallery, Katerine Alrudin popped out of her room, demanding at the top of her lungs that Carlinia return her sewing kit, then darted back inside without waiting for an answer. Alana, Pritali, can one of you lend me a pair of clean stockings? Someone called from below. I loaned you a pair yesterday, Edsina, came a reply from above. Doors banged throughout the well as women rushed out to shout for Tamali or Desandra, Ladra or a Tuan, or a score of others to return to this or that borrowed item or lend something. Had a sister been present, the cacophony would put them all in the soup kettle to their necks on a hot fire. What kept you, Moraine? Suan said breathlessly. Come on, before we're left behind. She set off at a rapid stride, as though she really expected the guardsmen to be gone if they did not hurry. There was no chance of that, of course. But Moraine did not dawdle. She was not about to drag her feet at a chance that she might leave the city. Especially not at this chance. Outside, the sun was still well short of halfway to its noonday peak. Thickening dark grey clouds rolled across the sky. They might have more snowfall today. That would not make the task any easier. The walk was easy, since the wide, gravelled path through the trees that led to the west stable, beyond the tower wing that held the Acceptors' quarters, had been cleared. Not for the convenience of the Accepted, of course. Most of the sisters kept their horses in the west stable, and workmen shovelled that path clean 2 or 3 times a day if necessary. The stable itself was 3 sprawling stories of grey stone, larger than the main stables of the Sun Palace. The wide stone-paved stable yard in front of it, almost filled by a crowd of rough-coated grooms and saddled horses and helmeted tower guards who wore grey steel breastplates over nearly black coats, and equally dark cloaks worked with white teardrop of the flame of Tar Valon. 7 striped tabards over the breastplates marked out the bannerman and lone officer. Brendis and Maidani were climbing into their saddles, and 6 other Accepted, cloaked and hooded in a strung-out line, were already riding towards the sunset gate, surrounded by their guards. Moraine felt a moment of irritation that so many had beaten her and Suan down. Had they packed nothing to be so quick? But they did not know what they were really looking for. That buoyed her spirits again. Pushing through the crowd, she found her bay mare, the reins held by a lanky groom with a disapproving expression on her narrow face. Very likely she frowned on and accepted having her own horse. Few did. Most could not afford to keep a horse, and besides, opportunities to ride anywhere outside the tower grounds were rare. But Moraine had purchased Arrow to celebrate attaining the ring. an act of ostentation that she suspected had nearly earned her a trip to marine study. She did not regret the purchase, even so. The bear was not tall, since she despised looking like a child, which she did on tall animals, yet Arrow could keep running long after larger horses had tired out. A fast mount was good, but a mount with endurance was better. Arrow was both. And she could jump fences that few other horses would even try. Finding that out had earned her a visit to the mistress of novices. Sisters took a dim view of accepted risking a broken neck, a very dim view. The groom tried to hand her the reins, but she hung the scrip from the saddle's tall pommel by its strap, then unbuckled the flaps of the saddlebags. One side held cloth-wrapped parcel that proved to contain half a loaf of dark bread, dried apricots in oiled paper, and a large piece of pale yellow cheese, more than she could eat by herself, but some of the others had larger appetites. The other side bulged with a polished wooden lap desk, complete with a thick sheaf of good paper and 2 good steel-nibbed pens inside. No need for the penknife, she thought ruefully, careful to keep her face smooth. She did not intend to let the groom see her look abashed. At least she had been prepared. The lap desk also held a tightly stoppered ink jar of heavy glass. Much to the groom's undisguised amusement, she checked to make sure it was tightly stoppered. Well, the woman could snicker all she wanted, not bothering to hide it behind a hand, but she would not have to deal with the mess of ink leaked out over everything. Sometimes Moraine thought it a pity the servants did not see except the way novices did. The groom made a derisory bow as she finally took the reins and bent to offer cupped hands for a mounting step, another mocking gesture. But Moraine disdained the help. Donning her snug riding gloves, she swung easily up into the saddle, let the woman snicker at that. She had been put on her first pony, on a lead to be sure, as soon as she was old enough to walk, without someone holding her hand, and had been given her first real horse at 10. Unfortunately, accepted dresses did not have skirts divided for riding, and the necessity of pushing her skirts down, vainly trying to cover her legs, spoiled the dignity of the moment somewhat. It was the cold that concerned her, not modesty. Well, partly modesty. She noticed some of the guardsmen studying her stockinged legs, bare almost to the knee, and blushed furiously. Attempting to ignore the men, she looked for Suan. She had wanted to buy Suan a horse in celebration too, and now she wished she had not let Suan talk her out of it. Suan could have used whatever practice she might then have had. She scrambled onto a mount, a stout grey gelding, so awkwardly that the placid-seeming animal twisted its head around to look at her in consternation. She nearly fell off trying to get her other foot into the stirrup. That done, she gripped the reins so tightly that her dark grey gloves strained over her knuckles. Her face set in a grim expression, as if prepared for an onerous test that she might fail. For her, it was. Suan could ride, she was just very bad at it. Some of the men stared at her half-exposed legs too, but she appeared not to notice. Of course, if she had, it would not have flustered her. According to her, working a fishing boat meant tying your skirts up and exhibiting your legs well above the knee. As soon as they were both mounted, a slim young under-lieutenant, his helmet marked by a short white plume, told off 8 guardsmen for the escort. He was not quite pretty, really, behind the face bars of his helmet. But any tower guard knew better than to smile at accepted, and he barely looked at her and Suan before turning away. Not that she wanted him to smile or to smile back. She was no brainless novice. But she would have enjoyed looking at him a little while longer. The leader of the escort was not pretty, a tall, grizzled bannerman with a permanent scowl who curtly introduced himself in a deep, gravelly voice as Stella, formed his soldiers in a loose ring around the pair of them, and turned his rangy roan gelding towards the Sunset Gate without another word. The guardsmen heeled their mounts after him, and Suan and she found themselves being herded along. Herded! She held on to calmness with effort. It was good practice. Suan seemed not to think she needed any practice. "We are supposed to go to the West Bank," she called, glowering at Stella's back. He did not answer, thumping her heels against the grey's plump flanks. She pushed up beside the man, almost sliding out of her saddle in the process. "Did you hear me? We are to go to the West Bank." The bannerman sighed loudly and finally turned his head to look at Suan. "I was told to take you to the West Bank." He paused as if thinking of what title to use in addressing her. Guardsmen seldom had reason to speak to accepted. Nothing occurred to him, apparently, because he went on. It was without honorifics and in a firmer tone. "Now, if one of you gets herself bruised, I'm going to hear about it, and I don't want to hear about it, so you stay inside the ring, here? Well, go on now, or we'll stop right here until you do." Clenching her jaw, Suan fell back beside Moraine. That explains that. With a quick glance to make sure none of the soldiers was close enough to overhear, Moraine whispered, "You cannot think we will actually be the ones, Suan." She hoped for it, true, but this was real life, not a Gleeman's tale. He might not even be born yet. "As much a chance us as anybody else," Suan muttered, "more since we know what we're really looking for." She had not stopped scowling at the bannerman. "When I bond a warder, the first thing I'll do is make sure that he does what he's told." "You are thinking of bonding Steela?" Moraine asked in an innocent voice. Suan's stare was such a blend of astonishment and horror that she nearly laughed. But Suan nearly fell off her horse again too, and she could not laugh at that. Once past the iron-strapped Sunset Gate, with the gilded setting suns that gave it its name set high in thick timbers, it quickly became apparent that they were angling southwest through stone-paved streets towards Alindaya Gate. There were any number of water gates to the city where small boats could enter, and of course North Harbour and South Harbour for river ships, but only 6 bridge gates. The Alianda Gate was the most southerly of the 3 to the west, and not a good omen for coming near to Dragon Mount. But Moraine did not think Steela would let himself be turned. Live with what you cannot change, she told herself sourly. Suan must be ready to chew nails. Suan was silently studying Steela's back, not glaring any longer, but studying the way she did with puzzles she loved so much. The maddening, intricate sort, with pieces fitted to go together so it seemed that they could never come apart, only they always did come apart eventually for Suan. The word puzzles too, and the number puzzles. Suan saw patterns where no one else could. She was so absorbed with the bannerman that she actually rode with some ease, if not skill. At least she did not seem ready to topple off at every other step. Perhaps she would figure out a way to turn him, but Moraine gave herself over to enjoying the ride through the city. It was not as if accepted were allowed outside the Tower grounds every day, after all, and Tarvalon was the largest city, the grandest city in the known world. In the whole world, surely. The island was nearly 10 miles long, except for public parks and private gardens, and the Ogier Grove, of course. The city covered every square foot of it. The streets they rode along were wide and long and since cleared of snow, and all seemed full to overflowing with people, mostly afoot. Those sedan chairs and clothes litters wove through the crowd. In that press, walking was faster than riding, and only the proudest and most stubborn, a Terran noblewoman, stiff-necked in a tall lace collar, with her entourage of servants and guards, a cluster of sober-eyed Kandori merchants with silver chains across their chests, several knots of brightly coated Morandian dandies with curled moustaches who should have been out in the fighting were mounted. Or those with a long way to go, she amended, making another futile effort at covering her legs and frowning at a tilt-eyed Saldean, a tradesman or craftsman by his plain woolen coat, who was ogling them much too openly. Light, men never seem to understand or care when a woman wished to be looked at and when not. In any case, Steeler and his soldiers managed to keep a path ahead of them with their mere presence. No one wanted to impede the way of 8 armed men and armoured tower guards. It had to be that which opened the crush of people. She doubted that anyone in the crowd would know that a banded dress indicated an initiate of the White Tower. People who came to Tarvalon stayed clear of the tower unless they had business there. Every country seemed to be represented in that crowd. The world comes to Tarvalon, so the saying went. Tarrabona men from the far west, wearing veils that covered their faces to the eyes and were transparent enough to show their thick moustaches clearly, rubbed shoulders with sailors, leather-skinned and barefoot even in this cold. From the river ships that plied the Erin, a borderman in plate mail passed them riding in the other direction, a stone-faced Shinaran with his crested helmet hanging from his saddle, and his head shaved except for a topknot. He was certainly a messenger headed for the tower, and Moiraine briefly considered stopping him, but he would not reveal his message to her, and she would have had to force her way through Steeler's guards. Light, she hated not knowing. There were dark-clad Kyranian, easy to pick out because they were shorter and paler than nearly everybody else. Altaran men in heavily embroidered coats, Altaran women clutching their cloaks, bright red or green or yellow, to shield what their low-cut dresses exposed to the icy air. Terrans in broad striped coats or lace-trimmed dresses, and plainly garbed Andorrans who strode along as though they not only knew exactly where they were going, but intended to reach there as soon as possible. Andorrans always focused on one matter at a time. They were stubborn people, overproud, and they lacked imagination. Half a dozen copper-skinned Domani women in fancifully worked cloaks, doubtless merchants. Most Domani women were. Stood buying meat pies from a push barrow, and nearby an Arafellan wearing a coat with red slash sleeves. His black hair dangling down his back in 2 braids, decorated with silver bells, was waving his arms and arguing with a stolid Ileana, who appeared more interested in wrapping his vividly striped cloak around his bulk. She even glimpsed a charcoal-skinned fellow who might have been one of the sea folk, though some Terrans were as dark. His hands were hidden in his frayed cloak as he scurried away in the throng, so she could not see whether they were tattooed. So many people made a din just by their normal talking, but wagons and carts added to it with the squeak of poorly greased axles, the clatter of hooves, and the grate of steel-rimmed wheels on the paving stone. The carters and wagon drivers shouted for people to give way, which they did reluctantly, and hawkers cried ribbons or needles or roasted nuts or a dozen things more from barrows and trays. Despite the cold, jugglers and tumblers were performing on some of the street corners. Men and women with cups laid out to collect coins were playing flute or pipes or harp, and shopkeepers standing in front of their shops called out the superiority of their goods over any others. Street cleaners with their brooms and shovels and barrows cleaned away what the horses left behind, and any other trash as well, shouting, "Make way for clean shoes, make way if you want clean shoes." It was so normal. No one appeared to notice the heavy smell of sour smoke that hung in the air. A battle outside Tarvalon could not alter what went on inside Tarvalon's walls. Perhaps even a war could not. But you could see as much in Kyrene. If not quite the same numbers or quite as much variety, it was Tarvalon itself that made the city unlike any other. I need to BRB. Watch your ears, everyone, just in case. And we're back. That made a good spot because the paragraph ended at the end of the page. The White Tower rose from the centre of the city, a thick bone-white shaft climbing almost 100 spans into the sky and visible for miles. It was the first thing anyone approaching the city saw, long before they could make out the city itself. The heart of the Aes Sedai power. That alone was sufficient to mark Tarvalon apart, but other, smaller towers rose throughout the city, not simply spires, but spirals and fluted towers, some close enough together to be linked by bridges 100 feet in the air, or 200, or higher. Even the topless towers of Kyrene did not come close enough to matching them. Every square had its fountain or monument in the centre, or a huge statue, some atop plinths as much as 50 paces tall. But the buildings themselves were grander than most monuments in other cities. Around the palatial homes of wealthy merchants and bankers, with their domes and spires and colonnaded walks, crowded shops and inns, taverns and stables, apartment buildings and the homes of ordinary folk. Yet even they were ornamented with carvings and friezes fit for palaces. A fair number could have passed for palaces. Nearly all were ogier built, and ogier built for beauty. More wondrous still were the structures dotted throughout the city. Half a dozen in sight on every street, where the ogier masons had been given a free hand. The 3-story banking house suggested a flight of golden marble birds taking wing, while the Kandori Merchants Guild Hall seemed to represent horses running in surf, or perhaps surf turning into horses, and a very large inn called the Blue Cat strongly resembled exactly that, a blue cat curled up to sleep. The great fish market, the largest in the city, seemed to be a school of huge fish, green and red and blue and striped. Other cities boasted of Ogier-built buildings, but nothing like what Tarvalon possessed. Scaffolding surrounded one of the Ogier-made structures, obscuring its form so that all she could make out was the green and white stone and the fact that it seemed all curves, and Ogier stonemasons moved on the wooden platforms, some hoisting large pieces of white stone on a long wooden crane that stuck out over the street. Even Ogier work needed mending now and then, and no human mason could duplicate their craft. They were not seen often, though. One of them was standing in the street, at the foot of the broad ladder leading up to the first platform, in a long dark coat that flared out above his boot tops, with a thick roll of paper under one arm. Plans, no doubt. He could have been taken for a human if you squinted, and ignored the fact that his huge eyes were on a level with Moraine as she drew abreast of him. That, and the long tufted ears that stuck up through his hair, and a nose nearly as wide as his face, and a mouth that all but cut the face in two. His eyebrows dangled onto his cheeks like mustaches. She offered him a formal bow from her saddle, and he returned it with equal gravity, stroking the narrow beard that hung down his chest. But his ears twitched, and she thought she saw a grin as he turned to begin climbing the ladder. Any Ogier who came to Tarvalon would know an accepted dress when he saw one. Flushing, she glanced from the corner of her eye to see whether Suan had seen, but the other woman was still studying Steeler. She might not have even noticed the Ogier. Suan could become very engrossed in her puzzles, but to miss seeing an Ogier? Nearly an hour after leaving the tower, they reached the Aliander gate, wide enough for 5 or 6 wagons abreast to pass, uncrowded and flanked by tall towers with crenellated tops. There were towers all along the city's high white walls, thrusting out into the river, but none so tall or so strong as the bridge towers. Going up again. Oh, why has no one redeemed Stretch? I have to do it myself. There we go. There were towers all along the city's high white walls thrusting out into the river, but none so tall or as strong as the bridge towers. The huge bronze-strapped gates stood wide open, yet guardsmen atop the gate towers were keeping watch, ready to order them winched shut, and 24 more on the side of the road carrying halberds kept an eye on the very few who passed by. She and Suan let their escort drew those eyes like iron filings to magnets, or rather, the banded dresses did. No one said anything about accepted leaving the city, though, which suggested another party had gone out of this gate already. Unlike the bustling streets, the gate had no traffic, and all who had wanted to seek the safety of Tarvalon's walls were long since inside. And despite the apparent normality inside the walls, no one seemed to think it safe to depart just yet. One of the guardsmen on the roadside, a wide-shouldered bannerman, nodded to Steeler, who nodded back without stopping. As their horses' hooves rang on the bridge, she felt her breath catch. The bridges themselves were marvels. constructed with the aid of the power, stone lattice work arching nearly a mile to solid ground beyond the marshy riverbank, unsupported that whole way and high enough at the centre for the largest river ship to sail beneath. That was not what struck her, though. She was out of the city. The sisters impressed deeply on every novice that so much as setting foot on the bridges constituted an attempt to run away, which was the worst crime a novice could commit short of murder. The same held true for accepted. They just did not need to be reminded. And she was out of the city, as free as if she had already worn the shawl. She glanced at the soldiers around her. Well, nearly as free. At the highest point of the bridge, more than 50 paces above the river, the Stealer abruptly drew rein. Was he mad enough to pause for the view of Dragon Mount rising in the distance, its broken peak emitting a ribbon of smoke? In her euphoria she had forgotten the cold, but a strong breeze slicing down the Alendrel Erenin, slicing right through her cloak, reminded her quickly enough. The stench of charred wood seemed particularly strong on that wind. The trumpets had stopped, she realized. Somehow, the silence as ominous as their calling had been. Then she saw the cluster of horsemen at the foot of the bridge, 9 or 10 of them staring at the city walls. Why the trumpets had gone silent no longer seemed so worrisome. The riders' burnished breastplates and helmets shone like silver, and they all wore long white cloaks, spread across their mounts' cruppers. Embracing the source filled her with life and joy, but more importantly at the moment it sharpened her sight. And as she had expected, a flaring golden sun was embroidered on the left breast of each of those cloaks. Children of the light. And they dared to block traffic on one of the Tarvalon's bridges. Well, there was only her and Siwan and the guardsmen, but the principle was the same. The fact that it was Siwan and her and tower guards made it worse, in truth. But that made it intolerable. Bannerman Stealer, she said loudly, white cloaks must not be allowed to think they can intimidate initiates of the tower or tower guards. We ride forward. The fool man did not so much as glance around at her from his study of the white cloaks. Perhaps if she had given him a little rap on top of his head with a small flow of air. Moiraine, Siwan's whisper was low, but managed a sharp edge. She looked at her friend in surprise. Siwan wore a scowl. How had the other woman known? She had not begun to weave. Still, Siwan was right. Some things were just not allowed. Guiltily she released Sadar, and sighed as all that joyous exultation drained away. Shivering, she pulled her cloak tighter, as if that would do any good. At last the white cloaks turned and rode back into the village. Aleander was a very large village, practically a town, with brick houses of 2 or even 3 stories, roofed in blue tiles, where they showed through the snow, and its own inns and shops and markets. The blanket of white made it appear clean and peaceful. For long moments the white cloaks vanished. Only when they appeared in a gap between 2 buildings on a street heading north did Stealer heel his mount into motion. His gauntleted hand rested on his sword hilt, and this is annoying me, but I will deal with it. His gauntleted hand rested on his sword hilt, and his head swiveled constantly, searching for the streets ahead. As they rode down the final length of the bridge, where there was one group of white cloaks, there might be another. Moiraine felt suddenly grateful for the presence of Stealer and his men. A dagger would not be much use against a white cloak's arrows. None of her preparations were turning out to be very useful. When they reached the edge of the town, Siwan again thumped her grey up beside the bannerman, still so wrapped up in her own thoughts that she rode with something approaching, not grace certainly, but at least steadiness. Bannerman Stiller. Her tone combined firmness with civility, and a strong element of certainty. It was very much the voice of command. Stiller turned his head to her, blinking in surprise. "You know why we are here, of course," she went on, and barely waited for his nod. "The woman most likely to leave before hearing of the bounty are those in the camps most distant from the city." How about if I just unplug that one? There we go. Now it's not so annoying. "The women most likely to leave before hearing of the bounty are those in the camps most distant from the city. Visiting them yesterday would have entailed some danger, but the Amelin has reports the Aiel are retreating. Like, she sounded for all the world as though the Amelin regularly shared reports with her. The Amelin has expressed her unwillingness to let any of these women slip away without receiving the bounty. Bannerman, so I strongly suggest that we follow the Amelin's urging and begin with the more distant camps." Her gesture might have seemed vague to anyone other than Moiraine, but it just happened to point straight at Dragonmount. The Amelin seat will wish it. Moiraine held her breath. Could Siuan have found the key? "There's not an Aiel this side of the Erenin, so I hear," Steeler replied in an agreeable voice. The next moment he dashed her hopes. "But I was told the camp's closest to the river, so that's what it'll be. And if I was told anybody, and I was told if anybody made a fuss, I was to take her right back to the tower. You're not making a fuss, are you?" "I thought not." Reining her mount in to let Moiraine catch up, Siuan fell in alongside Arrow. She was not scowling, but her stare at the bannerman's back was blue ice. The glow of Sadar abruptly surrounded her. "No, Siuan," Moiraine said quietly. Siuan frowned at her. "I could just be trying to see further ahead, you know, in case there are more white cloaks." Moiraine arched an eyebrow, and Siuan blushed, the light around her vanishing. She had no right to look so surprised. After 6 years practically in one another's belt pouches, Moiraine knew at a glance what her friend was thinking. And when she was thinking of mischief. For someone as intelligent as she was, Siuan was blind sometimes. "I don't see how you can stand this," the taller woman muttered, half rising in her stirrups. Moiraine had to put out a hand to keep her from toppling to the ground. "If the camp is much farther, I'll need a sister for healing." "I have an ointment," Moiraine said, patting the scrip hanging from her saddle with a touch of satisfaction. The penknife and dagger might be useless, but at least she had thought of the ointment. "Now if only you had a carriage in there," Siuan grumbled, but Moiraine only smiled. Allendale lay empty and still. The village had been burnt at least 3 times in the Trolloc Wars, once more near the end of the War of the Second Dragon, and twice during the 20-year siege of Tar Valon by Arthur Hawkwing's armies. And it seemed the inhabitants had expected the same again. Here a chair sat in the snow-covered street, there a table, a child's doll, a cookpot, all dropped by people hurrying to get inside the city with whatever they could take with them. Then again, every window appeared to be shuttered tightly, every door closed and no doubt locked. Whatever remained behind kept safe against the people's return. But the stink of burning was stronger here than on the bridge, and the only sounds were the creak of swinging inn signs and dull clop of the horses' hooves on the paving stones beneath the snow. The place no longer seemed so pristine, it seemed dead. Moiraine felt a great relief when they left the village behind, even if they were riding south and away from Dragonmount. The countryside was supposed to be quiet, and the smell of burning faded the further they went. Siuan plainly was not relieved. From time to time, she looked over her shoulder towards the great black peak of Dragonmount. Half the time, she needed a steadying hand from Moraine to keep her in her saddle, and more than once she ground her teeth audibly. They had often discussed which Arger they might join, and Moraine had long since settled on the blue for herself, but she thought Suan might well end up choosing the green. The first camp they came to, 2 miles below Elindia, was a cook-fire-dotted sprawl of wagons and carts and tents in every size and state of repair, mixed with rude shelters made of brush. Hammers rang on anvils at 3 different forges, and children ran shouting and playing in trampled, dirty snow as though they were unaware that there had been a battle or that their fathers might be dead. Perhaps they were. It would be a mercy. The horse lines were nearly empty, and aside from the blacksmiths, few men were in evidence, but a long line of women, well above 50, stood in front of a canvas pavilion where an accepted was seated at a table with 4 tower guards arrayed behind her. So Steeler did not so much as slow down. Moraine embraced the source briefly and felt Suan do the same, just to better see who it was, of course. A multitude of thin Tarrabona braids surrounded the distant accepted's face. Serene was the most beautiful woman in the accepted quarters, except for Elid, though she seemed completely unconscious of it, which Elid definitely was not. But she had remarkably little tact for a shopkeeper's daughter. Her mother must have been glad to see Serene's sharp tongue go off to Tarvalon. "I hope it doesn't get her in hot water this time," Suan said softly, just as if she could read Moraine's thoughts, but then they both knew Serene well. A friend, but a nettlesome one at times. Her saving grace was that she seemed as unaware of what she had said wrong as she was of her face. 100 paces later, the light around Suan vanished, and Moraine released the power too. A sister might see them. After all, the next camp, less than a mile farther south, was even larger and more disorderly, and without anyone taking names, it was noisier as well, with 6 forgers working, and twice as many children rushing about shouting. The relative absence of men was the same. The nearly bare horse lines. But surprisingly, a number of closed coaches dotted the camp. Moraine winced when she heard the Moraindian accents as they rode in. Moraindians were a quarrelsome lot, prickly over points of honour no one else could see, always fighting duels. But when Steeler announced the purpose of their visit in a bellow that would have frightened a bull, no one wanted to quarrel in the least. In short order, 2 weedy young men in worn cloaks carried out a table and a pair of stools for Moraine and Suan. They placed the table out in the open, but 2 other youths brought 3-legged braziers that they set at either ends of the table. This might not be too unpleasant after all. And that, my friends, is 2 chapters. I figure 2 chapters every time I stream. Maybe it's 2 chapters a night. We will get through this and we will enjoy. Thank you all very much for your company. And I am going to send us on to a friend who I didn't realize was currently streaming or back at streaming. Okay. Copy your raid messages if you wish. If you don't wish, that's fine too. But thank you all very, very much for coming along. Thank you very, very much for hanging out. And I hope this was enjoyable for you. And just take care of yourselves and have a wonderful time zone. I really should do this more often, you reckon, eh? All right, let's all go give Nad some love.
Ooh, I like being called